Charlie Austin, recently deceased rare book librarian from Hillman at the University of Pittsburgh, the rare book librarian, who I knew from the time I was very little. Became very acquainted with him after my parents divorced. He told me one time that university politics are the most ugliest politics of all. When he said that, I thought he was using hyperbole. But the more I've seen what they did, the more I've become aware that he's more than half right. I'd like to show you the essence of the documentation that what was done to me in Pittsburgh in 1986 was a critical fulcrum for the idea that the Axis got, Germany and Japan, looking at American liberalism, that the American liberals could be targeted by a combination of fundamentalist Zionists from the Muslim, Christian, Orthodox world, with, of course, Jews. And the Green Party could pull together a challenge to liberal suasion, not neoliberalism, liberalism, like Martin Luther King and the Kennedys, my father, and so on. And thereby avenge the Axis idea of weakness being immoral and the strong prevailing as central teaching concepts against liberal ideas of human rights and civil rights and so on. Equity challenged civil rights. In other words, it was a question of token superachievement. How do you get into the super state? So to begin with, what I'll show you is my father's book from 1949. Explain to you basically what it contains. It was recently republished by Forgotten Books. It's called America's Stake in Human Rights. It's from 1949. It may seem like a small book, but it's an important statement. He basically argues that teachers have an important function in education to dissuade racists from believing that they are right and giving them information and arguments to make clear that the facts are not with them. And he says that one could be disappointed, but it shouldn't lead to pessimism. That undesirable attitudes may prevail in some people, but other people may reflect upon themselves and become more learned and self-critical from abandoning views that they have learned are foolish and wrong. And this was 6 years before King went to Montgomery. It was early in what was known as the Civil Rights Movement. Well, I'd like to move to Carnegie Mellon University in 1993. The reason I have these archives is that Seattle Public Library requested the microphone. It took a really long time. I asked Seattle Public Library if they knew the date. I'd asked sometime in 2001 or 2002. And it took like a year before I'd given up hoping. They came eventually. It seemed like a great deal of hesitancy on Carnegie Mellon's part. At the Carnegie Mellon Student Union, see a nurse with looking aghast at the ideal nurse. This was a publication that knew more than they were telling about what was going on. And 6 years earlier, I had been at the Pitt News. 7 years earlier, I'd been at the Pitt News. In 1986, the Pitt News had my ritual descent column, and I was getting letters from Peter Gabriel. And you might wonder, why did I divest of those letters from Peter Gabriel? I'd like you to see the forces that were impinging on the persona, the forces impinging on the deaf person that might have led to no longer wanting to be associated with Gabriel, who acted like he was my friend. There were postcards and cryptograms and so on. Because what I'm going to show you, I think, is clearly evidence that this is the real John Lennon. Why would Yoko Ono go after my father? Well, as a rival, her attorney said when you see a particularly fine turn of phrase, which I now know meant a particularly fine name like James McRiley Creary, you want to strike it out like an oppositional baseball team. Why would Yoko Ono be so fiercely concerned to make clear that my father was her adversary? Well, because he was a survivor of World War II's Navy. His voice was heard on the San Jacinto. He was a radio room lieutenant on the CVL-30. Now, John Lennon had a song called It Would Be Like Starting Over. Notice the girl from this Anne Moran film, who was an author who dealt with science fiction concerning the disappearance of prime movers, what they called prime movers. This was an Anne Moran film. Notice how she looks. She has her hands cupped over her ears, as though there's a thunderclap. And she looks like the spitting image of Gail Burson at Seattle Center, playing the violin next to a geisha with the parasol beam going up between her legs. And there's another lookalike on Robert Fripp's album from 1979 with a man in the background dropping something into a particularly still pool. And then there's, of course, the Neva Corporation image with the image reroute of the motorcade in Dealey Plaza. Because the Texas school book, which they were trying to repossess after having planted it on me, was a lawsuit justifying the execution of JFK. And they show an image of JFK in the letters, one very distorted, one very clean cut, like the two nurses. And they were operating on the neuroplasm that they had implanted, you can now see, that I did not know was there. Who were these people? Well, before I answer, let me show you what they convinced me about themselves. In the microfilm, when it finally came, you could barely read this, but in the newspaper, it was plain as day. There were a couple of things that Pittsburgh has excised from the record by making them much more difficult than they should be to retrieve. But what it says is from this attempt to put together a pastiche of what was happening through the collection of concepts that were in the memory banks and in the records. Okay, and what it says is, and it was very clear in the original, revenge for Auschwitz. I presented a case that these people were seeking revenge for Auschwitz, and they were from the Jewish Holocaust survivor community, and they had made brutal pornography on Mount Desert Island of a execution direction, about which I have learned a great deal. And when I got back to Pittsburgh, they were waiting for me, and they still had more that they were yet to do. And when I unearthed the letters, the one thing I must say is that I believed at first that they killed John. I wrote this in that newspaper. I believed that they killed John Lennon. I believed that, and I no longer do, because they were never arrested and I was. And what's more is I was surrounded with a butcher gang who done biological poisons to me in the name of queer franchise, and they set me up with a hottie, and they made no secret of what they were up to. Made no secret of it. They were playing two virgins pussy ball, and it comes out in cinema that this is the symbol of the pornographic institution. The C stands for copyright and Crary. In other words, you die if you try to get copyright. Seattle slasher murdered a girl along the Penny Line in alliance with Russia and Donald Trump. You could see the image from the Telltale clip, the girl spreading her legs, and two girls, one with a ball. There's another girl who waves her left hand and then goes sit down. So what is the Japanese configuration in Dealey Plaza? This Rosemary Willis. She's in a Shinto shrine outfit, the red and white of the Shinto shrine, and the letters say, I say is, not was, because the evidence shows that it's not just chance that the line from the Ayn Rand film came up as John Lennon's sign off as UB40. They used symbolism. Ostro, Donald, Ostro has 00 like 007. Take that off, you get STR, UB40, UB40. That's how old they say John Lennon was. And on August 1980, they put out signing off. Okay, so it's not just chance that's an allusion to the brain behind all this, the face behind the face, which goes back to Gabriel D'Annunzio. He believed in spontaneous reincarnation. It'll be just like starting over if you get gunned down in World War I. I'm really sick of Nabucco and her stupid code of what boys should do and girls should do. They should wed first. Nabucco was the star of Children of Hiroshima. And they use Jill, because as they put in charge of the Green Party, and they not only put, they use poison. Here, see the purple disc thingo Jill gave me. Neuroplasm, and they have a diva on October 20th, which is my birthday. And this was a fight club over in Midori Goto. So you see the Riddler coming into Dealey Plaza, the Dallas Police Department, while they were interrogating Oswald. So what is the root of this is that they were thinking about this a long time. It was media strategy between Alan Dulles and Ian Fleming. They were convincing people of something that wasn't true in order to seize power by making it seem that their victim was liable for what they pulled. And Seattle went all along with this. That's my father's obituary, the back of it, the reverse face, where he talks about injecting people. Notice Green Party of Germany article. And Don Ono who, like Nosferatu who. And what you see is that they made a claim on Maduri Goto and on Victory by claiming that I had violated the school's chivalric code by being seduced by a woman who was a little bit higher in authority than me. And this too traces to Seattle Green Party. Notice Dixon, it's run here by a Black Panther named Aaron Dixon. Lady Panthers. This was clocked to the seduction of Jimmy Crary by Alpina. And they used that to challenge the idea that I had actually been tortured. But when you look at the evidence of poison on Mount Desert Island and at Seattle and my father's obituary, you realize that even though known as attorneys uses the word truculent, which my mother said spoiling for a fight, and I came out challenging people to look at the idea that John Lennon had been killed in a holy war by the AIDS attackers. I soon learned that the Beatles were advocating for the people who wrote the script. They were claiming this was from the script. It's the language of what was done to me. And they were claiming that I was not under compulsion, even though the neurohypnotist who designed the nerve agent, and I produced, my eye doctor said there was evidence I had been beaten very severely as a child that damaged my eyes. They ignored all this. They said you were having fun because you're like John Lennon, in order to advocate for the people who they claim killed him. What that means is that John Lennon signed off and they staged his double fantasy as a function of what they planned, which in psychiatry is called transcultural psychiatry. In other words, they were going to get what put together, they have fringe words like psychodynamics. They were plotting how to use John Lennon to instill feelings of guilt in their victims so they could say that they were bringing them back to God, bringing them back to, and they had a lunatic French who were atheist gays siding with Yoko Ono's favorite, Maduri Goto, who appeared on the Texas Queer magazine cover, working Seattle behind the scenes, helping John Shulman steal from the museums and so forth, saying, we can make it happen. Yeah, we can make it happen. Yeah,